and welcome to For the Hawkra, a Seattle Seahawks podcast here on the Believe Podcast Network. Of course, you can find us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Seahawkers podcast. You can subscribe to the show there, give us a like, even leave some comments. We like to respond to comments. Adam, I know you like to respond to comments. How you doing, buddy?
I do enjoy responding to comments, and I just want everybody to remember when they make their comments, whatever tenor and tone that they come into the comments at, they will probably have that match. So, if it's a reasonable debate about something, you'll probably get a reasonable debate back. If you say something positive, you'll probably get a positive note back. If you come in and are just a bona fide catfish, you might get a little bit of that back. So just something to think about when you're out there in comment land. And again, we do appreciate it. For me, it's fun all the way around. I don't really care which way you go. I'm just setting your expectations.
Clinton, I know you have some expectations for this episode today because we are going to be talking about one of the things that has happened here this offseason is that we've seen a lot of new contracts for wide receivers. And, the Seahawks have wide receivers on their team. So no new contracts apart from Tyler Lockett getting his extension, which we're all happy about. But, it's still relevant to us in a way as we watch these salaries increase. And so I know this is a topic you're interested in, Clinton.
Very much so, boys. I mean, hey, look, yeah, it's 2024, but this is a start of a new era with a whole new coach. So it is roster building. And how do you want to construct a roster now in the year 2024? And some of the things we're seeing with some of these other teams we'll talk about, it's just interesting. It's an interesting way to go roster build. And Seattle might be in a bit of it's a great problem right now that we got three great wide receivers, but in pretty short order, it could be time to pay the piper. And that'll be really cool to see. What do we want to do? How are we going to shape this up? So a good offseason discussion, guys. I'm excited for it.
Well, when you talk about roster building too, I think the reason this all came together as a potential discussion is the signing of Justin Jefferson to a 4-year, $140 million contract for the Minnesota Vikings.
Careful.
And it's a spicy contract, and he's taking up 13.7% of the Vikings cap, just in terms of the percentage of the salary cap at signing. We also saw Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Lions get nearly 12% of the Detroit Lions cap with his 4-year, $120 million contract. And in terms of these two players, I don't know if because Justin Jefferson obviously makes a ton of sense because he's an all-pro wide receiver. I don't know if Amon-Ra's gotten an all-pro vote quite yet, but another guy up there, A.J. Brown with his 3-year deal for $96 million. So all guys averaging at $30 million and above. And when you look at that, nearly 12 to almost 14% of the cap for those three guys, is that going to be too much when it comes to paying wide receivers? And maybe it has to do with some of the other makeup of the team, Adam, but it's you're starting to get a pretty high number because when you look at the percentage of cap at signing, there's just, in terms of guys who are at 10% and above, there's only 12 players in the NFL at wide receiver who are getting that much of the team's salary cap when they sign that deal.
Yeah, it is an interesting discussion in terms of how do you build a team. And I think you need to think about where the league's heading to begin with, right? And how the league works as it currently is constructed and what it looks like going forward. And I think one of the big parts of that is that it's clear the NFL, the league office, they want more offense. Offense sells, like that's where they want to go. The big part of that is the passing game. I mean, they're really, really into their quarterbacks and big points and throwing the ball around the yard a lot. And so you see the rules over time be adapted to encourage that style of play. And if that's going to be the case, then you need to invest heavily in tackles, quarterbacks, and wide receivers to a degree. And Clinton, Brandon, you guys both had a discussion a little bit in the group text we had earlier today about, will wide receivers become the next running back position? And my answer would be yes and no, but I'm curious to your guys' thoughts on that first, Clinton.
So So yeah, we were discussing this thing. Like it's really cool to get the metrics too. Like only 12 players right now are 10% or higher. And at some point we're looking at, okay, Lockett got his extension, JSN got plenty of time. DK's the one. DK, a big X like DK. What will Seattle do? He's got some more years. However, another year later, he might be like, hey, it's time to extend again. And that's really where this kind of all started for us too. The thing is, the biggest thing that I think has shifted in the last, let's say, probably 5 to 7 years in college football is, and then how it impacts the pros is two things. Number one, the straight up volume of really high quality receivers coming out of college every single year. It's there's got to be some maximum, and we're probably approaching what that is on an average year by year basis. And then number two, people don't take 2, 3, 4 years to learn a system anymore. Not at wide receiver, but it used to be a big, okay, hey, it's a brand new wide receiver. They need time. They need 2 seasons to then become, a really effective wide receiver. We are not seeing that. A lot of them, even like Addison last year, I think he had 10 touchdowns, right? So you have those two things happening make me believe that GMs are going to come to a bit of a moment, Brandon, where it's like, hey, yeah, it's going to be commoditized at least somewhat, that we're probably pitching to some ceiling, and there'll be like a bit of a market correction, and probably pretty soon.
I don't think it's gotten to the point, though, where as a GM, you can just say, well, I'm going to trade my top receiver away for picks, a lot like the Titans did with AJ Brown.
Yeah. And
right? Oh, well, AJ Brown's going to cost a lot of money. I'm going to trade him away, and I'm just going to draft a dude in the first round, because then I'm going to have a dude under contract for cheap. And that's the way I'm going to get around this idea. That's more of the trending toward that running back model in terms of, well, I'll get a dude coming out of college. Because one of the things I found is the Athletic did a look back. And I guess you can make the argument that now, like you're saying, Clinton, some of these younger guys are coming in with more experience. But they went back and looked at the hit rate of NFL receivers going back to 2011. So it's a pretty big sample size. And the number of guys who are categorized as busts or reaches, it's like 60%. And so the idea that you can trade a guy away, get a first round pick, you better trade him away for 2 first round picks and take a receiver with both if you want to try and match that hit rate, because it's more than likely you're going to whiff than you're going to hit. And so as we get into the discussion about DK Metcalf, Adam, I mean, the idea that's, I think, one of the reasons why we've been so anti-trade DK. For one thing, he wasn't even a first rounder. He was the end of the second round. And so if you're still going to get a first round pick, the AJ Brown thing has not gone well for the Tennessee Titans.
You're not wrong about that. But really, Burks was one of the only guys that didn't hit out of those first 2 rounds of that draft. Right. I mean, really, at this point, I believe that the teams have gotten really good. The league as a whole has gotten really good at pushing the wide receivers to the round in which they should be picked. For example, you look at the last 3 years. I mean, here's some of the likes of the guys that have come out over the last 3 years: Jamar, Waddle, Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, Garrett Wilson, Olave, Jameson Williams, Christian Watson, George Pickens, Romeo Doubs, Drake London, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Rashee Rice, Tank Dell. Like, you go down the list, like, that's a lot of damn good receivers. And most of those guys were picked in the first or second round. No, you get your Pickens or your Pukas and that sort of thing every now and then. But I think they're getting a little better at drafting at that position, to being a little over 50% in success rate. So, even if you drafted back-to-back 2 years of first round receiver, you're probably going to get one. You're probably going to get. Now, should you jettison the guy you have to get that cheaper player and not pay him the contract? And this is where it depends a lot for me. I kind of was looking through the receivers, tried to rank them all. That got hard. So I was like, look, I think tiers are a little bit more appropriate because there's style and offenses and all that kind of go into it. But kind of for me, the first tier are the dudes that every single Sunday when you go up against them, you can't stop them. You can only hope to contain them. There's no chance, even if your defense is awesome, they're going to get theirs. And that consists of 3 dudes to me. And that's Tyreek, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. Put them in whatever order you'd like, but those dudes, they're unstoppable week in, week out. There's nothing you can do about it except for maybe triple them, right? And then you're leaving everybody else open. Then I think there's the next class, the second tier of receivers that are legit number ones. And when you're playing them week in, week out, you better pack a freaking lunch, man, playing these guys because they can eat you alive pretty much at any time. But, you know, they're not quite at the level of those top 3 dudes, but legit number 1 dudes. And these guys are like Cooper Kupp, Debo, DK, CD, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Amon-Ra, AJ Brown. Like that's kind of that group to me, that you don't take those guys and trade them for the lottery pick in the draft. I think you pay those guys, especially if it's a second contract, not a third contract. Start getting into third contracts, I don't think you worry about it. Where I think you start to talk about drafting a dude, getting rid of a guy instead of paying him is kind of the third tier. And these are the guys to me that are like, hey man, they're a legit number 1 or maybe even an awesome number 2, but they're a bottom half number 1 guy. And, you know, every now and then they'll tear you up, but most weeks when you go and you're matching them up, you throw a spoon on any one of these guys and you're like, yeah, we got a pretty good shot. Whoever your top corner is, right? And, you know, these are guys like Puka, Pickens, Nico Collins, Waddle, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, Olave, Ayuk, Diggs, Zay Flowers, Devonta Smith, Amari Cooper, you know, Tyler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, you know, on and on and on. Jordan Addison, like these, there's a zillion of these dudes in the draft, like literally a zillion. I mean, we're talking the last 3 years, there's been 5 to 7 dudes in every draft. And we're not even talking about this last year's draft, right? 24, because we don't know about these guys yet, but it looks damn good. I think you've got a good chance to replace those type of guys with a draft pick. And I just wouldn't pay these guys a second or third contract. Again, if you're in the first 2 tiers, yep, you pay them because they're hard to come by. You usually have to be at the top of the draft, but you know, the rest of these dudes, you can get them in the mid to late first, all the way down through the second.
I got 4 things, because Adam just dropped a lot of knowledge there, right? So first thing to get out of the way, Amon-Ra St. Brown, first team All-Pro last year. Okay. So we said earlier, like, was he? He is. Second thing, Adam successfully said Pickens your Puka a couple times, which is just great, right? So you had Pickens and Puka back to back. So nice job there. I think CD Lamb wants a word in your tiering, likely after last year.
He wants to be in the top 3?
I think he is in the top 3 potentially too. So I think there's a discussion there, but I think the most important thing for our podcast and this discussion,
you can put Trey Brown on a guy and lock him down. I don't think he deserves to be in the top 3.
Love it. Love Trey. Well, look, CD stats don't lie, right? And then he had, I know yards don't matter, but wide receiver yards and stats, he might be top 3 at this point. But I think the most important discussion, point 4, is DK really tier 2? I think that is the actual question at hand. Is he actually tier 2, or is he more in that mix of that long tail Adam was mentioning? And that might be something cool to examine a bit further, Brandon.
I have that information at my fingertips, gentlemen, because
nice.
I went and looked just at the NFL receiving leaders over the last 5 years. And unfortunately, that does kind of skew things a bit in terms of a guy like Justin Jefferson and a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who came out in the 2020 draft. And so they're going to be kind of more toward the middle than, because the guy at the 2 and 3 guys who are at the top, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, in terms of, and we're talking yards. I mean, we can go by average or that sort of thing, I suppose. But I just went straight up yards production over 5 years. Those are the 3 guys who are at the top. And then you get into guys like AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, DJ Moore is on there, Cooper Kupp's on there. But, you know, like Jefferson's at where he is, and that's without his, you know, a full season. And, you know, Cooper Kupp has had essentially a full season because he's been injured over that amount of time. But that kind of goes then to the consistency when you start getting to guys like Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, DK Metcalf, because those guys, they don't put up the huge numbers, but they're so consistent over those 5 years. They don't miss a lot of games, and they're averaging about 1,000 yards per season. So it's still top 10, top 11 in terms of production receiving wise. And yeah, if you're asking me if you should pay a guy who's a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL, absolutely.
Yeah. Now let's talk about DK and whether or not he belongs in that group, right? You mentioned he's the 11th most yards in that 5 years but he's not just a compiler. Like, think about it last year when you had to have it, when the chips were on the line, who came through with the biggest catches of the year all year, game in, game out? It was DK. He was that dude. And the other team knew it was coming, all that stuff. Same with Debo. Debo's numbers aren't massive, right, in terms of just receiving, but he brings a lot of other stuff to the game. DK's physical play brings a lot to the game and really opens things up for everybody else. And especially when you think about, the struggles of the last year of Russ and, making that transition, and then Waldron and his up and down offense in an offensive line that's been fairly shaky. Receivers are hyper dependent on quarterback and scheme. And I'm not sure that DK has been helped out the most in that category compared to a lot of these other guys. So is he a top 10 wide receiver? I bet your sweet ass he is. Absolutely. I don't think that there's any way to argue otherwise, other than just being a stat nerd. Like, you got to watch the game.
Well, that's what the point I'm making is that with the stat nerds, I mean, he's top 10. If you go by average per reception, he's top 7 over the past 5 years.
And had his best year last year too, right? He had a really good reception, just yard per reception last year. And I thought he had his best year last year as well. Just in general, I know it wasn't his 5. Yeah. So I put it out there to poke the bear a little bit and stir the pot, right? Because I know we might be like, oh well, you guys are just big homers. You're putting other dudes in a tier below them. I also agree with y'all that it's about the feel and what the person means to the team also. And remembering too, that he's a legit X in the NFL. And that means something. That is a really big, really important position that most teams don't have. That legit X. I'd say about half do not. So yeah, very difficult to replace also. It's a different type of dude to replace. Even with a lot of the market being flooded with more talent this year. So so I think I'm with you guys. I think he's right on that cusp. And again, but he's also our guy. Like, I love DK, man. I love what he brings. I love the fact that he gets fired up. I love the fact that he defends he defends his teammates, defends the logo. Like, be really, really cool if he has a really beautiful middle part of his career, and that grub can open him up in a new way. And some of the dudes we're talking about that you listed too, they frankly get a lot more targets. They get a lot more targets. So what happens if DK gets 15% more targets in any given year? I think he could, really, really solidify himself up there. But the last thing I'll say is he gets the benefit of being a popular player. I think other teams and other people like him. But then there's the double-edged sword of it is, I think they think he's like a B rate, like a very good receiver, but not quite a great one yet. That's how I think the rest of the league perceives him. That's my take.
I think part of that is because he hasn't had those all-pro seasons, and a part of that is he does have to share the ball with Tyler Lockett, who he has shared the ball well with over these last 5 years. I didn't go down the list that much farther, but Tyler Lockett is in the top 15 in terms of yards over the last 5 years. So that eventually could change probably as we get, 3-4 more years down the road. But I suppose it doesn't help him in terms of the all-pro voting, but I think we can still recognize that he can deserve to be paid as like one of those top 5 type guys. And I think that's one of the questions too, Adam, is that,
right,
at what point do you decide to go ahead and pay him early? He's got 2 years left on his deal with guys like Jefferson getting this type of deal. Shoot, do you go ahead and say, once a guy like CD, because he's in that similar tier, once he gets his deal, you just go, okay, well, CD's getting his deal. What do you say we go ahead and up this, do a 5-year deal? And I know Clinton wants to jump in on this too, but I kind of want to hear from you first, Adam.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, well, in terms of when do you pay DK? You pay him yesterday, because the market just keeps going up and up and up at an incredible rate. What you don't want to do is be like the Jaguars and go out and pay Christian Kirk 4 years, $72 million, a year ago. And now that doesn't look quite so bad, because the market has gone
right.
even more bananas even since then. So I would say pay him as soon as possible. You're going to save yourself some money down the long run, especially with the cap increasing. And I don't know if that fits into where your head was at here on this, Clinton.
The thing I don't want to do is, I'm not sure Brandon was suggesting this. However, the words that were being used, I'm like, I don't think we want to tether ourselves to what CD Lamb's going to get as the next barometer, because you guys keep calling him a tier 2 guy. Guys, he had 135 receptions for 1,749 yards last year and 12 touchdowns.
Okay. So can I be sure to clarify what
1,749 yards?
Yeah. Can I just be sure that I'm being very clear about what tier 2 is? Yeah. Tier 1 is like
3 dudes,
unfreaking stoppable, amazing dudes. I've watched CD Lamb disappear in huge moments for that team over and over and over again. He's just not quite that guy. Does that mean that he's a bad receiver? Hell no. I'm saying if you want to put him at the top of tier 2, I'm cool with that. Like, whatever. Like, those dudes, you pay them. They're amazing players. They are legit week in, week out, number 1 receivers. And that is CD Lamb. He's one of those dudes. He's not a bottom half of the league number 1 receiver. He's a top half of the league number 1 receiver.
Yeah.
I don't want tier 2 to come off as being disparaging, like, in any way.
Well,
like,
hold on here. But what Clinton is saying is that he doesn't want to pay DK at the level of CD.
Correct. Well, CD, because CD is about to go get Justin Jefferson's contract. It maybe a few dollars less. We're not talking about a lot less. Like, it ain't gonna be. What did Waddle get, by the way? Waddle got
too much.
Paid very. He's also quite good, but he got paid handsomely also. And you said AJ was at 33 million, I think, right, or something like that, over 30. And Amon-Ra got over 30, I think, as well, right? From what you said earlier. Is that correct?
Waddle was 3 years, 85 million. Okay. And so he's at 11% of the cap too. Amon-Ra, almost 12% of the cap, 4 years. Okay, let's take, he would have to get probably at least Amon-Ra money. If we were to, and we're talking about an extension now that would add time to the 2 years left that he has in Seattle.
Right. The only thing I was having the allergic reaction to was the CD Lamb ranking. And Adam, thank you for, going into more detail about what tier 2 means for you. He's in my tier 1. That's fine. Right. We can have a difference of opinion there. With that, I also think paying DK the Waddle contract or paying DK maybe the Amon-Ra contract is about the ceiling that we should look at. And I do think it's smart to go get it done if we can. I agree. If we can lock it up, if we can move things around, because it's only going to, we know what's going to happen. The cap's going to go up over time. It's going to get more expensive for a legitimate upper echelon X receiver. I just think this CD Lamb is going to get, I think he's going to get the Jefferson contract, maybe minus a couple of dollars, or maybe the same exact contract, because he's next man up.
The reason why I would say you have to go higher is because he has 2 years left on his deal. If it's not to the point where it's beneficial for him, he'll say, okay, well, I'll finish out my contract. I'll be awesome for the next 2 years. And then when it's time to get that contract done, the salary cap is going to be massive. And I will get paid then, because the cap's going to be higher. And we're going to be looking at the Justin Jefferson contract going, oh man, I wish we would have paid him Justin Jefferson money when he got paid.
if you're CeeDee Lamb, why don't you want to get paid right now and get that guaranteed money right now, sign a 3-year deal, have another bite at the apple when you're still a relatively young dude in free agency, when the cap goes up yet again, get another chunk of guaranteed money. Like I wouldn't see that as a negotiating advantage for CD to be like, well, I've got 2 years left. I'd love to just play that out. Well, heck no, man. Get that money now and get it later. Like, I'm surprised more of these dudes don't Revis the crap out of this sort of thing, right? And go almost just year to year. Not that teams are going to love to do that, but I mean, maybe do 2-3 year deals, like shorter deals. I'm surprised that receivers haven't gone that way, but I think where the teams are going to get in trouble in terms of roster building is when they're paying that tier 3 receiver that kind of Waddle type money. It's a complete waste. When you think about it, a Waddle type receiver comes out 5 times every year. 5 times every year. Like, that's how many dudes in the next 3 years of his contract. There's going to be 15 dudes that come out in the draft that you can pick and get Waddle type production out of on a rookie deal. And not only that, but then you think about all the other tier 3 receivers that if the league finally figures out this inefficiency in the market, they're going to be jettisoned by the time they get to their next contract. It's going to drive the price of all those guys down, much like, kind of the tier 2 of running backs, because the running backs that's suppressed more severely than I think the wide receiver market will become.
Yeah,
it'll just be like a tier less than that. I just think at that point you can then pick up that, tier 3 type receiver for vet minimum or a smidge more, or be able to draft one of the 5, 6, 7 dudes that come out every single year. Because to your point, Clinton, the volume of passing has gone through the roof, and these guys are ready to go from day one.
Yeah, for sure. And also there seems to be a huge availability of these guys in college. And because there is that for the last 5 or 6 years, well, then the free agent market also gets saturated or more saturated. So when they're not a first rounder after 4 years, okay, they're up. If they are a first rounder, which JSN was, then you probably got that 5th year protection, which is still very interesting, I think, too. And maybe a bit of where this all goes is I'm not shocked that, especially with the pricing, that so many wide receivers go in the first round now. That 5th year option, if you do hit, which Adam, you went through a bunch of them that hit, if you do hit, that 5th year option gives you incredible flexibility. It's what's become a very expensive position. So, the last thing I'll say, I'll pass it to you, Brandon, is I'm still on the point of I don't think you could afford to waste 1 to 3 years of a rookie wide receiver contract if he's in the first round. And was JSN last year, quote unquote, a waste if it's a really crowded wide receiver room, which I think is still going to be a discussion this entire year, Brandon.
What do you consider a waste when it comes to a first round wide receiver?
I think it's volume, so I think it's something. I think if you believe you have a top tier talent, that you're going to want to really get them close to 100 attempts as quickly as possible, and then accelerate beyond that, get into the 120s, 130s, 140s with how many times you throw the ball their way. And when you have 3 legitimate wide receivers, that becomes difficult. So I think I don't say hurting yourself, but I think, you take a wide receiver in the first round so you can get the 5th year protection and you think you have a dude. And if you're not giving them the volume, then I think it's more like you're not maximizing the time that you have on a cheap contract with a wide receiver. But to try to put a metric to it, I think it's trying to get to that level of volume quickly.
So he was 7 targets short of 100 last season. We can argue about whether those targets were effectively used, because the way Shane Waldron decided to use them was a bunch of bubbles. Probably not the most effective, unless you're just trying to get a guy used to catching footballs on an NFL field. Then maybe that's the case. And I think we did see them kind of modify how they used them a little bit, going shifting toward the end of the season. But to me, the yardage numbers don't match up. But again, that was how they used him. but the target numbers, I don't see him as having a wasted rookie season.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll pass to Adam right now too. I agree. I agree. It was a good base rookie season. I guess I'm more pitching towards, I wouldn't want to see that as a repeat in year 2, where then 2 of the first 5 years are there. And I guess, can he jockey and pass Lockett this year? I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch. What do you think, Adam?
I think it doesn't much matter whether it's your first round rookie or your veteran wide receiver or your, ex receiver who's middle-aged in football terms, in terms of DK, right? Like, I don't give a crap how many targets any one of them gets. I don't give a crap how many yards any one of them gets. What I want is, as a group, for them to be unguardable. In whether or not that's Tyler having a massive year and then, JSN doesn't get many targets, but sure, he was drawing a bunch of coverage, so Tyler was having himself a year. Great. Is that a waste of a first round pick? Hell no. Like, if you're going to play that way, right? Throwing the football a bunch.
Yeah.
In terms of, I need to see JSN take more targets than Tyler. Who cares? What I want to see is more third down conversions. What I want to see is more touchdowns in the red zone. Like, that's what I care about from them as a group. And if JSN can help with that, because he ascends even a little bit more this year and doesn't necessarily get more targets, then great. If he does take all the targets and they as a group play better, then great. Like, it just doesn't matter to me.
I think, and not to speak completely for you, Clinton, but you speak for yourself.
No, the one thing where I think it can matter is that point about the 5th year. So if you get through year 2 and the volume hasn't been there yet, and because let's just say, because it's a crowded room, it might not be that, but just to play it forward, because it's a crowded room, then by the time you have to make a decision on your 5th year by the end of year 3, correct? That's when you have to say we're opting for the 5th year, right?
At the end of year 4, or end of year. That's a good question. When is it?
I can't remember.
It's in May.
Yeah.
Right. I'm forgetting if it's like, I thought it was after the 3rd full season. Does that make sense?
That sounds right.
Yeah. I maybe if we put it out there and we're wrong, I will get roasted for this one. So that's the way it goes. But I guess my point being is, I would hate to miss on a 5th year option because we didn't feed a dude that really could be fed earlier in his career. And you take a dude in the first round because you think he's good, obviously, but that 5th year advantage is so huge. And I think it's a big thing to kind of prepare for, and make it like a no doubter. Like, yep, like this is a no doubter. We're not even thinking about it, that this guy's getting a 5th year contract, versus like a Josh Jacobs this year. I know it's a different position. Thought Josh Jacobs was pretty darn good Raiders running back. And then he's gone. And now he's on Green Bay. And I thought he was really, really solid, but I don't know. I just, anyway, Brandon, help me out here. That's the big thing. Or Adam, that's the big thing I worry about, is missing the timing on a 5th year because you didn't really focus on the dude.
Okay. So in your world, if the receiver's good, you exercise the 5th year option and you get another, quote, cheap year out of the receiver. Is that basically it? Like, do I have that down?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Which receiver that's been good has ever made it to their 5th year option?
I don't know. I'd have to go look.
I don't think there's hardly any of them, because if they're good, you end up re-upping them after year 3 or year 4. Like, they never make it to the 5th year option if they're good. So it's literally a waste.
But it has to, factor in to the availability of the team's, negotiating power, right? To be like, hey, we could just have you out there and you're under contract.
And all of these diva receivers all do the same damn thing. They go, nope, you're not going to do that. And I'm not showing up. And they always get their contract. Like, it never, it's a hammer that they have over the player's head that doesn't exist. Like, the player's just like, yeah, okay. Like, not playing for that. And you're going to pay me. or trade.
Yeah, it only factors in if the receiver is good, and we're going to know whether or not he's good by that time. And I don't know if getting him more volume, and unless you're talking about how do we develop him into the type of player that we want? Do we want him to be the guy who we always know that he's there on third down? A lot like what we saw from DK this last year is that he was the third down guy. Like that's, if they needed to pick up a third down, it was probably going to DK. And because he had improved his route running last year, like he was generally finding ways to get open on third down to where Geno could find him. And if you're talking about, I mean, I don't know if volume necessarily, if volume within an NFL game drives development any more than practicing as an NFL player and getting better drives the development.
I just want to say, I agree with Adam now, by the way. So we got through all this, and he made that last point about like they get their contract anyway. I'm like, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right about that. I do see that it is May 2nd when they have to declare. And this year around, it was the 2021 first rounders, right? So 21, 22, 23, they played. You are declaring before they start their fourth year, whether or not you're making your fifth year option. So I was accurate there. I do agree that the good ones, especially the diva wide receivers, just wide receivers being the diva group, let's put it that way, not the diva wide receivers, that they tend to get theirs anyway. So I will concede the point for sure. Yeah, that's it. I will just say, Adam, you're correct on that one, dude.
Well, I appreciate that. But, the JSN is going to have to show that he is at a DK level, a Debo level, a Cooper Kupp level, that tier 2 type level by the time that he's either done with his 5 years or he gets re-upped in 3 or 4, however it is that it works out. He's going to have to show that before you re-up it, because if he doesn't look like he's going to be, more than a high end 2, low tier, number 1 receiver, then you let him walk or you trade him. I think that's where, again, the inefficiency in the market is going to start to be exploited by the smart teams.
Yeah. And I get what you're saying too about team building, because looking especially at the Dolphins as that example, you have Tyreek Hill, you have Jalen Waddle, and then you bring in a dude like Odell Beckham, who's toward the end of his career, but he can still get it done in terms of receiving. He does have the injury questions. It's just that you would prefer that a team like the Seahawks work it out to where you have it structured and the guys get paid in the way that, you have DK, you have Tyler Lockett, who is, in terms of his percentage of the salary cap is more toward the lower end. It's just, you're getting awfully close to paying too much when, you're going to have to pay Tua. And then you have Reek, who's one of the highest paid wide receivers, and Jalen, that makes it really difficult. And then you start seeing impacts then on the defense at different parts of the offense. They're not able to sign one of their guards, and they ended up losing a lot of key free agents this offseason. I think because they made that choice then to pay Waddle when they already have that clear number 1 on their team. So I think you can start to see the dangers, especially when you're looking at Miami.
I agree. And I want to ask you guys.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Adam. You take it, man.
Well, it's also not a slam dunk that you just go out and get the receiver like we talked about earlier. But one of the things that I was dead wrong about during the draft when we were talking about different things and team building and all that, I was like, wide receivers are a dime a dozen. You can pick them up in the 4th, 5th round all the time. It doesn't even matter. It turns out that the league has gotten good at figuring out which guys are going to be good, and they tend to go in the 1st and 2nd round. So it's not without cost to go out and get that guy in the draft, because you're going to have to spend an early pick. It's like, you can, and you do get a higher hit rate at the back end of the draft on wide receiver than maybe any other particular position group, but that's only because there's a zillion receivers out there, right? And it's not like it's way higher. I mean, we're talking maybe you're down to 15, 20% rather than like 5% on, quarterbacks or something, right? And so it's not without cost to go out and get that.
And there's another reason too. There's volume, like you said. There's also, and it's different than other positions. There's very much different types of receivers. I guess there's third down backs nowadays. A guy who could come in and just block and be a good third down back and catch the ball in the backfield. That is true. But wide receivers, you literally want to sometimes have 4 different types out there too. Between your X, your Y, your slot, et cetera, et cetera.
You want to have your speed guy. You want to have your big guy who can catch those jump balls. You want to have, the guy who's not afraid going over the middle.
Yeah. You want your gadget guy that plays special teams also. So it is more specialized in that way. And I did want to ask you guys. So you were talking about Waddle's contract, and I think what we're trying to do here is really pin the tail on where would be cool with DK's contract sussing out percentage wise, right? So is it going to, whatever, 10, 11, 12%, somewhere in that range? For you, let's start with, I'm actually going to go to Adam first, because I know one of these dudes, he's not you, John. Would you rather have Waddle or T. Higgins? And I bring up T. Higgins because...
Just don't even start. Okay. Just Waddle.
Yeah. Well, T. Higgins drafted in 2020. He 33rd overall, so second rounder, just outside the first round. And now he's being franchise tagged, but he's also trying to really maneuver away to figure it out with Jamar Chase, who's going to get the JJ contract. And, Higgins said he's going to report and all that jazz, but that's a dude that is a quality NFL receiver who, you miss out on that 5th round. And now they got to franchise tag him, and that's expensive. So just trying to put one out there, but you answered that it was Waddle. Brandon, for you, is it Waddle or Higgins? What do you like?
Yeah, I suppose that the Bengals wish they would have taken him in the first, just to have that 5th year as an option. But again, like you said, you have the franchise tag. So he's, I think, one of those perfect examples of a guy that you really aren't sure if you want to pay. And maybe I lean more toward the idea of, if we can't get even a Jalen Waddle type contract done for a guy like that, you trade him. And I don't even think I would. That's more of a guy who I would trade and risk taking a first with second round pick, because I think there are enough guys out there that if you let a guy like that go, you might be able to make it work with a veteran for a year or two and deal with it that way. And Joe Burrow's so good. He's going to find a way to distribute the football. And when you have a guy who is one of the legit top 3 who's unstoppable anyway, you just get that guy more volume. Who cares about T. Higgins?
Right. And real quick, Adam, Brand, to your point, you mentioned that, maybe they wanted to draft him in the first round or sneak back in so they get that 5th year. Just for the record, that was the year they drafted Joe Burrow first overall. So they had an okay draft. They did okay. Right. So. They did all right, Adam.
Yeah, they did just fine. The T. Higgins thing, maybe I'm just the T. Higgins curse, like personally, because every time I watch T. Higgins, he does not have a good game. Right. I've watched a good number of his games, and I've never come away being like, wow, what a difference maker. Maybe it's just that I happen to catch his low points. But with that said, even if I'm missing the high points, that puts him as a high end number 2, low end, number 1 receiver. Okay, fine. You trade him and you go from there. Just like Brandon was saying, I think these things become relatively easy to figure out as a team if you can get a clear philosophy on the thing in terms of, if he's one of those legit number 1 guys, you pay him. If he's not, you move on. And you keep going from there, because to your point, Brandon, you can just bring in like the Chiefs did the last couple of years, bring in, Juju or whoever, right? And still win titles because your quarterback's good enough and, your scheme's good enough. And, and for the Bengals, I mean, shoot, they still have Jamar and, like you're saying, Clinton, you need a certain guy to do this, certain guy to do that. Jamar does all of it. So you can kind of plug in anybody next to him.
And the times where T. Higgins was good is those games where Jamar happened to be injured and he was just the only other guy. And so I feel like Burrow has a way of being able to find those guys and make it work. So when you have a quarterback who's that good, I think you're able. Now, the Dolphins, it's a totally different situation because I don't think Tua is the type of quarterback as Burrow. And so having two really good wide receivers, and in my mind, Waddle's better than T. So maybe that makes a little bit of sense. But good discussion all around, guys. If people enjoyed this and you want to help support the show, you can go to getintheflock.com. You can also be sure to subscribe and tell a friend that we're on the Believe Network now. If you're listening to podcasts, find us and subscribe to the show out there on the Believe Podcast Network too. And gentlemen, I think with that,
there's only one thing left to say.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.